and welcome to this week's edition of Waves from the Word online Bible study. This week we're going to be talking about Genesis chapters 16 through 20. And if you've not already done so, hit the subscribe button down below, and that way you'll receive a video or an email every time that I do an updated video. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's just call this chapter Desperate Times Call for Desperate Measures. At this point, Sarai is actually getting really tired of waiting to get pregnant. She and Abraham, it's been 10 years since they entered the land of Canaan, and she's just quite honestly tired of waiting. To speed things up, she actually comes up with an idea. She thinks that it will be a good idea if she has Abraham, or Abram, he's still called Abram at that time, sleep with her maid servant girl whose name is Hagar. Don't you think that's just a wonderful idea? Evidently, this was not an uncommon practice during that time. If someone was unable to get pregnant themselves, a lot of times they would have their husband sleep with someone else, and then they would just take the baby. I'm a woman, and I don't care how customary it was. I would have a hard time accepting the idea of my husband sleeping with another woman, even if it was just for a baby. From the outside looking in, it's easy to throw stones and criticize Sarai for not being patient, but how often are we just like her? I know there have been plenty of times in my own life where I have not waited on God's timing, and I've gone ahead with my own plans, and honestly, they turn into a hot mess. Abram agrees to go along with the plan. He sleeps with Hagar, and she, in fact, becomes pregnant. After Hagar becomes pregnant, I'm sure she is hormonal and maybe doesn't feel good, but she actually starts acting quite negatively towards Sarai. It's almost as though she feels superior because she was able to get pregnant where Sarai was not. Sarai wastes no time telling her husband that she has had it with little Miss Hagar. And Abram responds by telling Sarai, okay, I understand. You can do whatever you see fit. And Sarai wastes no time telling Hagar to hit the road. After Hagar leaves, God sends an angel of the Lord to ask her where she's come from and where she is going. And after she explains the situation to the angel responds by telling her to go back to Sarai and to submit to her. He also tells her that her descendants will be many, and she's having a son who will be named Ishmael. After returning to Abram's home, she later, in fact, gives birth to a boy. Abram was 86 years old when this happened, and they do name him Ishmael. An interesting fact. Did you know that Ishmael is actually worshipped today by Muslims? Muslims and Jews have been fighting for over 4,000 years. Here's my takeaway today. Sin isn't just about our actions today. Some sin can have consequences for thousands of years to come. A perfect example is this story and how the impatience of one couple has resulted in years and years of turmoil. We will hop back in tomorrow with chapter 17. Hey there, we're talking about Genesis chapter 17 today, and if you haven't already had a chance to read that chapter, I encourage you to take just a few minutes to do that. Let's fast forward 13 years from the last chapter, and the Lord actually appears to Abram and tells him that he will confirm the covenant they had, and he will begin to greatly increase his numbers. It's at this point that God changes his name from Abram to Abraham. This actually served as the final seal of the covenant between God and Abram. To symbolize this covenant, God instructs Abraham, he's now called Abraham, to be circumcised, and every male after him needs to be circumcised. Now, this isn't just people in his lineage. Anyone that is within his household needs to be circumcised. God proceeded to change Sarai's name to Sarah and told Abraham he would give him a son through Sarah. And Sarah can't help but laugh at this idea because they're very, very old at this point. God also told him that Sarah's son would be named Isaac. Abraham was also concerned about the status of his son Ishmael. Remember, Hagar had Ishmael. God told him that he would also bless Ishmael and that he would be the father of 12 rulers. After his discussion with God, Abraham found Ishmael, and they were both circumcised along with every other male in the household. And then from that point on, the instructions were that any new male baby should be circumcised when they were 8 days old. Today's takeaway has to do with no limits. Can you imagine being told that you were going to have a child at the age of 100? There are no limits on what or when God can do anything. Next time, we'll be talking about Genesis chapter 18. Genesis chapter 18. Another visit from the Lord is what Abraham experiences in this chapter, and it actually comes in the form of being visited by 3 men. Abraham encounters these 3 men and openly welcomes them into his home with gracious hospitality. He asks Sarah to whip up some baked goods. Abraham talked to the 3 men outside his tent while they ate, and the men told him that this time next year, Sarah would have a son. Sarah, meanwhile, is inside the tent, and I imagine her having her ear pressed up against the wall of the tent listening in. And when she hears them tell Abraham this, she can't help but laugh. She laughs out loud. Later, the men asked Abraham why Sarah had laughed at what they said. Sarah was shocked, and I'm sure she was a little fearful, so she denied that she laughed. The men left, and Abraham walked with them. They began to look down at the area at that time that was Sodom. They discussed how wicked the people were in Sodom at that time and what the Lord was preparing to do. Abraham was worried about Sodom and its people and began to intercede, asking God what it would take for him not to destroy the city and the people in it. After going back and forth, the Lord left. It's interesting to note the relationship between Abraham and God. It's almost as though they appeared to be friends, and God would listen to input from Abraham. It was not a friendship set like that they were both equal, but it was more like a friendship between a king and a confidant. My takeaway today is this: God is a gracious God. Despite his anger with our sin and the fact that he could wipe us away in one svelte swoop, he wants to give us the benefit of the doubt. That is evident here when he said he would save the city of Sodom if there were only 10 people, 10 righteous people in the entire city. Tomorrow, or the next time you watch, we will be talking about chapter 19. We begin chapter 19 with Lot being approached by 2 angels outside the gates of Sodom. Lot encouraged them to stay at his house, and he actually lavished them with hospitality. And if you haven't already noticed, this seemed to be a very hospitable culture. People welcomed in guests with open arms. Before everyone went to bed, there were several wicked men from the city of Sodom that approached Lot's house and wanted to know where these men, these angels, were. They actually wanted these angels to come outside because these wicked men wanted to have sex with them. Excuse me. Lot begged the men not to act that way, and believe it or not, he actually even offered these wicked men his 2 virgin daughters if they would leave these angels alone. These evil men would not listen, and they tried to press their way into Lot's house, and the angels actually pulled Lot in and slammed the door shut. After that, the angels actually struck these wicked men with blindness, so they couldn't even see where to reach for the door. The angels warned Lot that they had been sent to destroy the city and encouraged him to gather up all of his relatives. So Lot did that, but he was only able to convince his wife and his 2 daughters to leave. Even though the angels had kind of prompted him to do this, he rounded up his family members, but he still just lingered at the house. And the angels gathered up Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters and told them, look, you need to leave now and do not look back. When Lot safely arrived in a place called Zoar, God began to rain down sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's wife did what she was told not to. She looks back to see the destruction, and God immediately turns her into a pillar of salt. Lot then leaves this city of Zoar and takes his 2 daughters, and they actually go live by themselves in this cave, basically away from civilization. Well, the 2 daughters, I guess you could say, begin to kind of panic after a while and wonder how they're going to continue on their lineage since they're never around other men. So they come up with this idea to get their dad drunk and to sleep with him. So they both did this, one night and the other the next. And they both, in fact, became pregnant. The older sister had a son and named him Moab. The younger sister had a son and named him Ben-Ami. Moab is actually the father of the Moabites, and Ben-Ami is the father of the Ammonites. My takeaway today has to do with obedience. When God directs us to move, we should do so and not look back. Tomorrow or next time, we're going to be talking about chapter 20, which is the last chapter we're covering this week. Welcome back. Today we're talking about Genesis chapter 20. Abraham is on the road again in this chapter. This time he's headed to the territory of, I think it's Gerar. Once again, Abraham decides to lie about his wife Sarah and claim that she is his sister. Well, this results in Amalek, the king of Gerar, taking Sarah. Later, God comes to the king in a dream and warns him that Sarah is in fact married. He instructs him to return Sarah to Abraham because he is a prophet. God warns him that if he does not, he will die, and so will his people. The next morning, King Amalek calls a meeting and shares with everyone what happened in this dream. Amalek proceeds to return Sarah, and he also gives Abraham sheep, oxen, and male and female servants, as well as 1,000 pieces of silver. Abraham prays to God on behalf of the king, and God healed the king and also opened the wombs of all the women in the household. Evidently, when the king took Sarah, God closed the wombs of these ladies and none of them could become pregnant. So it's obvious that Sarah was there with him for a while because it was long enough for them to figure out that they could not become pregnant. My takeaway is this today: it's never a good idea to lie. Even what seems like a small, innocent white lie can have huge circumstances, not only for us, but for the others around us as well. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you've not hit the subscribe button, hit that button down below. You can also share your comments. I would love to hear your feedback, and I'll see you back here again next time.